So we're here with Jim Clemente. Thank you for meeting with us, Jim.
No
Jim was an FBI agent for how many years, Jim?
22 years.
For 22 years, and now is currently a television writer. And we're here to talk with him about his career in the FBI, as well as sort of to debunk, to examine some of the Clinton conspiracies that are out there. Well, thanks, Jim. Thanks for having us at your home.
No problem.
So let's kind of get started. How did you first get involved in law enforcement? Kind of give us a sense of your career.
Well, I was a lawyer first. I was a prosecutor in the New York City Law Department in the Bronx. I prosecuted youthful offenders and sex crimes. And then I became an FBI agent in 1986. I served for 22 years, retired in 2009. At the beginning of my career, I worked on the Violent Crimes Bank Robbery Squad. It's a joint task force with the New York City Police Department. And then I went undercover for a number of years on Wall Street and other areas. And then I worked public corruption and commodities fraud for a while. And then cold case homicides and major crimes in Washington, D.C. Then I was promoted to supervisory special agent and went to Quantico and became an FBI profiler. Basically, it's a behavioral analysis unit, and it is the kind of crimes that we looked at were serial and sexual and violent crimes, and we basically did research, we did training, and we consulted on cases across the country and around the world.
So talk about some of those cases. What are some of the more famous ones that the public would know about?
Well, Joan Benet Ramsey, the DC sniper case, Green River murders, you know, any serial or major sexual crime, many rapes in the Phoenix area. There were a number of obviously child abductions that I worked over the course of my career as well that were in the news, but many of them didn't make the news.
I'm sure difficult work, for sure.
Necessary.
Necessary, of course, yeah. And what kind of drew you first to the FBI? Was it?
I think when I was a kid, I always was curious. I always wanted to solve things. I read all the Sherlock Holmes books and thought I'd like to be a detective, but never really thought about the FBI. After I worked a case with the FBI when I was a prosecutor, I realized when the agent explained to me that they're basically federal detectives, and he recruited me. He handed me an application, and I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. I can use my law degree, my law background, as well as my curiosity, and I developed a reputation for being tenacious. I like to find out exactly what was going on. For example, one case came to me. It was a commodities fraud case, but it came to me as a real estate fraud, in the amount of about $25,000. And when I started digging into this company, I realized there was a lot more going on. And in the end, we indicted him and convicted the CEO of $480 million worth of fraud. So I just didn't let it go. I kept digging. Same thing with the Webb Hubble case. That was a small fraud that the Rose Law Firm had uncovered, and when I finished digging, it was $795,000 worth of fraud on the part of
Talk about the Webb Hubble case. Kind of let our kind of audience know who was Webb Hubble, who is Webb Hubble,
yeah.
And how did you first become acquainted with him?
Webb Hubble was the Associate Attorney General under Bill Clinton, and he was actually a partner at the Rose Law Firm with Hillary Clinton before they came to Washington, D.C. The basis of the fraud was that he was basically using customer accounts. He was billing customers for his personal expenses. So the Rose Law Firm, during the course of the Whitewater investigation, they were working closely with the independent counsel, or they were answering subpoenas from the independent counsel, and during the course of looking at records, they found some anomalies in his billing. They turned that information over to us. We started a full-scale investigation, and as I said, I uncovered a large amount of fraud by Webb Hubble.
And Hubble ultimately went to jail, right?
Yes, he did.
And was disbarred.
But I had gotten involved in the Whitewater case in 1994. I was asked to come to Little Rock. I was not told why, and because at that time the investigation was pretty much a secret, and When I got there, they asked me to review the commodities trading of Hillary Clinton. I had been undercover as a commodities trader in New York City on the New York Mercantile Exchange. I had a tremendous amount of experience in that field, so they asked me to review the trading records. The situation was such that not only did Hillary come out with $100,000 profit when she was selling short in a bull market, which means she's selling, but she doesn't have the commodity yet. As the market continues to rise, she still manages to get buys. She's able to buy the product back at a later date at a lower price, which is very difficult to do during the course of a bull market. But those were the trades that were assigned to her. However, during the course of that year of trading, there's also margin calls. If you sell it at this price and the price goes higher and higher, you have to make the difference up within 24 hours. You have to pay that difference. And the difference in the course of that year was hundreds of thousands of dollars. And she never made any of those margin calls. Somebody else must have.
So what was really going on, do you think?
Well, I think somebody was giving her the best trades and covering her losses.
And did the Bureau ever find out who that was, or?
It was unclear, but there was one guy who ran the entire operation there, and it was most likely him. But the problem was that it was beyond the statute of limitations, so we couldn't do anything about that.
Right, and so that was sort of your first encounter with the Clintons.
Yes, it
right?
was.
What did you make of them at the time? I mean,
well, I mean, there were a lot of rumors swirling around at the time. I basically saw them as, it's a small town, Little Rock, Arkansas. It's a very small, and at the time, especially, very backward state. I think it was the worst in the country in terms of education and so forth. I think it was small town enough for it to be small town politics. People were all friends with each other, and I think there was a lot of glad handing going on. But there's all these rumors swirling around about murder and so forth, and I think those are all ridiculous.
So talk a bit about being a commodities trader, what that was like, kind of the investigation, the day-to-day work of it.
Well, it was the first time the FBI ever put an undercover agent, a deep cover agent, into an actual fiduciary position. In other words, normally when an FBI agent goes in deep cover, they have a fake background, a fake company that they work for, or a fake job that they're doing every day.
Sure.
I actually had to go in, become a clerk, and over the course of 6 months study to become a broker, and then take the exams and get certified and licensed, which is what I did. The problem is that it's a very stressful position. At the time, I think they came out with a study of what the most stressful jobs are, and the number one stressful job was should I start that over again?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. The number one most stressful job was air traffic control, right? I can't. I lost it. Sorry.
Go ahead. We could kind of talk around it.
And the most stressful. They made a list of the most stressful jobs, and the number one was air traffic controller. Number two was commodities broker. Number three was police officer. So I had actually number two and number three going on at the same time. I had to wear a wire and get past security with that every day going into the exchange.
You didn't even get any of the benefit of actually being a commodities
No,
trader.
I didn't. I had to turn over all the money that I made we put it in a trust account, and then at the end of the operation we gave it back to the company I worked for. They didn't know, people I worked with didn't know that I was an FBI agent. And then, but on the day when we're actually trading, the floor had, I assume like something like 5,000 people working on the floor. And in the pit I was working, there was at least 200 men. And then when the Gulf War broke out, there was about 320 men in this pit because the trading was so active. And we were all smushed together, sweating on each other, and violently trading. In other words, people could make and lose millions of dollars in seconds. So everybody was really on edge. It was the most stressful thing I've ever done in my life. On top of the work that I was doing for the FBI collecting evidence, I had to actually be a broker, and it was a fiduciary position. I had to make sure that I didn't lose money for my customers.
Right, which is not easy to do.
No, it's not. It's a very difficult job to do, especially when all you had was 6 months of preparation, and you had to learn it on your own, basically. So it was a very difficult time, but I learned a tremendous amount during that time.
So I think you know, kind of jumping back to Little Rock for a moment, I think most people don't really kind of appreciate the kind of small town nature of Little Rock. That it's, I mean, we mentioned earlier, it was a bit backward, kind of like a good old boys kind of network. Kind of talk about, you know, you investigated some of the, you know, the major players there. Kind of talk about that part of your work, how you started the process of investigating there.
Well, I wasn't the only one. You know, obviously
Sure.
there were a bunch of FBI agents and United States attorneys and former United States attorneys and current ones and other attorneys, a couple of prosecutors from across the country. And under Bob Fisk, I think it was run really like a prosecutor's office. I think we did exactly what we would do in a regular criminal investigation. We interviewed people, we subpoenaed documents, we got bank records, we looked at phone records, we did everything that you would normally do to try to do sort of a white-collar crime investigation. When Bob Fisk got replaced by Ken Starr, it changed slightly in that I think Ken Starr was treating it more like he was a judge rather than like a prosecutor. And they would do things like write letters to the other side and ask them to explain things, which is not what you do in an investigation, because it gives the other side an opportunity to then cover it up. If they're not being legitimate, then they can continue to get away with their crimes by covering things up. And I think that really stalled the investigation, took more time.
What do you think he did to that?
Well, I think Ken Starr, his reputation in the news, in the media, they said he was a zealot, he was going after him. Well, by contrast, the fact was that he was much less of a prosecutor. He was much more involved in, well, let me weigh this out, let me see what's going on, maybe there's another explanation for this. And he really treated it more like he was the judge as opposed to he was a prosecutor trying to collect evidence and bring charges.
So whereas most of the media thinks of him as just this bulldog, aggressive investigator, your experience is exactly the opposite.
The exact opposite. And I think what happened, though, I think at first he hired a lot of new attorneys who were sort of academics and did not have any investigative experience. And then after that sort of didn't play out very well, he hired more, I think, aggressive people and some people who probably didn't really understand the weight of what they were doing and did some, you know, goofy things. I won't mention any names, but things.
What kind of goofy things?
Well, for example, instead of actually interrogating suspects when they were interviewing them, they would give them the information we had and ask them whether they thought that was it, or whether they had more information about it.
Sort of like a criminal's best opportunity.
Yes, it was unfortunate. And then, you know, sort of doing things like speculating about what the evidence was before actually finding out what the evidence was. So I think it's in those kinds of situations you get bad investigations, you don't have good prosecutions. But despite all that, there were a number, I mean, I think all but one of the times we went to the Supreme Court, we won fighting for information that the other side was trying to prevent us from having. And there were a number of convictions, at least 11 I believe, of people that were surrounding the Clintons and assisting the Clintons and in many cases insulating them.
So you worked on the Whitewater case. Kind of talk about that. It's been quite a number of years now, and I don't think it's kind of in the back of everyone's mind. So kind of tell us, you know, in a nutshell, what was the scandal and why was it important?
Well, the Whitewater case and the Whitewater investigation, I think, always get confused.
Sure,
the Whitewater investigation, it was a number of investigations of criminal activity involving and surrounding the Clintons. So the Whitewater case itself was a real estate investment that the Clintons were invited in. I believe they put in no money, and then when the investment became a loss, I think they wrote it off on their taxes, despite the fact that they did not actually put in any money to have lost. I think this is one of the things that Vince Foster had warned them against. Just pay the taxes, don't open that can of worms. They didn't listen to him. That was one of the things that...
Yeah, we'll get to Vince Foster in a moment.
Yes. But anyway, yeah, so that was the Whitewater case. There's also the Castle Grand case where Jim McDougal and was friends with Bill Clinton, and supposedly Bill Clinton came in and said, look, my wife is a partner at Rose Law Firm, and she's not bringing in enough business. Can't you throw any business her way? And so they brought her the Castle Grand project, which she worked on, and then conveniently, when it was determined that that was a conflict of interest, she lost all her billing records. There's theories that she destroyed them, all the electronic records, but a couple of years later in the White House, they turned up in the room between her office and her workout facility. They were found by a maid or an assistant. So clearly, and they had Hillary's fingerprints on them, so they were clearly her copy of the records. And yet they disappeared during the years that the investigation went on and turned up later.
What do you think accounted for them showing up in kind of that mysterious way?
Well, I think a number of things. During the time we were interviewing all the employees of the White House, not the political employees, but the facility employees of the White House, every single one of them. And one or two of them said they saw boxes with Vince Foster's name on it, for example. And I think we also were close to serving and search warrant on the White House because we got information that they had documents there that they had not turned over. And then right at that point, things started showing up, or they would produce thousands and thousands of pages, and buried in it somewhere would be the documents that we were actually looking for.
Interesting. So basically they just overwhelmed you with
They
material.
tried to, but, you know.
But you're thorough, so
Yes,
to find it.
I try to be.
Now talk to us a bit about the Rose kind of triumvirate of the lawyers. Kind of talk to us about the law firm. I mean,
well, the thing about the Rose Law Firm was it's the most prestigious law firm in Little Rock, Arkansas, and for many decades. And Hillary became
what kind of work does it do? I mean,
well, Hillary became the first female associate there ever, and when her husband was the Attorney General, and then she became the first female partner when he was the governor. And she was in the litigation department under Vince Foster, but she never tried a single case. I mean, there's some...
So sort of like a no-show job.
Well, maybe. I think she showed up, but I don't think she never had any litigation experience, but she worked cases. So they would do any kind of cases. I mean, from political cases to real estate investments and banking transactions, and it's high-level, lawyering. It wasn't sort of like a base criminal law firm that dealt with drunk driving and so forth like that.
Got it. So there are going to be some people who say, maybe the reason Hillary wasn't getting the best work at the Rose Law Firm is sexism. I mean, what's your sense of what she actually did there day in and day out?
Well, I mean, the fact is that she did work, but she didn't try any cases, and she was in the litigation department. But she was sort of mentoring under Vince Foster, and who was an incredibly righteous, honest, hardworking man. He actually graduated from law school, #1 in his class, got the highest mark ever on the Arkansas bar exam, and started work the day he graduated. Didn't go to his graduation so he could start work. He was a very dedicated man, and by all accounts he was a very honest person.
So how did he first come to the Rose Law Firm, and how did he first get kind of introduced to the Clintons?
Well, I mean, he came to the law firm far before the Clintons did, but they brought in Hillary when Bill was elected Attorney General. And then they made her the first female partner when he became the governor. And that is it's not unusual in a law firm to have somebody associated with the governor bring prestige to the firm, so they bring them up or move them up in the firm. But I think, she did day-to-day stuff at the firm, and when Bill asked Jim McDougal to throw her some business, and he bought her the Castle Grand project, she became the billing attorney on that case. The problem is that the course of that business transaction was such, I mean, it's been a lot of years, so the finer details I may not recall exactly, but they wanted to invest in this. They ran a savings and loan, so the amount of money they can invest into a speculative real estate deal is a certain percentage of the whole deal. So McDougal couldn't invest the entire 2-point-something or $1.2 million, so he maybe did the 200,000 or 100,000 of it from the savings and loan, but then he lent the rest of the money to Seth Ward, who would then without any recourse. He didn't have to pay the loan back, then invested that money into the same project. So it was a fraudulent transaction, and the Clintons, Bill apparently asked for this business to go to Hillary. Hillary was the billing partner on that, and then Seth Ward, who was, you know, basically a straw the straw investor, okay, basically into the project, but it was all really just the savings and loans money. So again, when that was being investigated, the billing records for that particular case disappeared, and then again showed up in the White House years later.
So we're sort of having this pattern of you know, emails now with the Clinton email scandal, mm-hmm, having this pattern of sort of documents going missing and then showing up at the right time or not showing up at all. Was that frustrating as an investigator? I mean, what was your experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, when I do an investigation, I don't want the target of my investigation necessarily to know exactly what we're looking for or why or how much, and I don't want them to have an opportunity to destroy evidence or hide evidence. So you have to do things in a surreptitious manner sometimes. You certainly have to do things by taking advantage of whatever technology is available, and you have to basically be very circumspect about who you tell what you're looking for. And the fact is that in that case, I don't think that was followed. Those rules were followed, and I think they were allowed to sort of dance around that investigation for the most part. And the fact that Hillary could come out and say that when those records were found, which she could come out and say, well, I don't know where the records came from, let Ken Starr figure out where they came from, or something to that effect, is just outrageous. I mean, it's completely outrageous. I think she's very self-interested, and that was just a move to sort of put the ball in his court, when in fact they were her billing records. They were in her residence in the White House. There's no other way they could have gotten there but through her. So anyway, but you know, again, at the time she was First Lady, and I don't believe that she was a target of the investigation as much as Bill was, because
because of the influence peddling,
yes,
nature of it. Now, talk to us about Vince Foster. I mean, there are lots of conspiracy theories. I mean, I hope we can kind of debunk some of them here.
I believe I did. I mean, I did the investigation. It's called an equivocal death investigation, and basically what that means is when you don't know what the actual cause of death is, homicide, suicide, accident, natural or undetermined, those are the 5 causes of death. And when the manner of death, the cause of death is the actual way, exsanguination, blunt force trauma, things like that. But the manner of death is how the person died. What is the nature of that death? And so I did an equivocal death investigation.
And how did you come to get involved with Vince Foster?
Well, when I was brought into the Whitewater investigation, it was originally to look at the commodities trading of Hillary, but then also then I got into the investigation of Vince Foster, Webb Hubbell. And when I put that investigation together and we were prepared to go to trial, they then asked me to look into the Vince Foster investigation. Partially because of my experience. I had been an attorney, a prosecuting attorney. I have a degree in chemistry. I was a evidence collector on the evidence response team in the FBI for 8.5 years. So basically, because of my experience, they asked me to sort of reevaluate that investigation. And so under Bob Fisk, they did a very short report and investigation on Vince's death, but they kept a lot of things close to the vest because out of deference to the family. They didn't publish a lot of the details, but then all of these conspiracy theories just abounded. So Ken Starr decided to reopen that investigation and do a more comprehensive investigation or report. So
and why do you think he did that?
Well, because there was a demand for it by the public, and I think because of the fact that there were so many conspiracy theories that were wrong. I mean, don't get me wrong. They were investigating the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, at the time.
Sure.
But they did not want some false rumors about homicides to be left hanging out there. So I did this investigation. We did an incredibly thorough forensic investigation at Fort Marcy Park, which is where Vince Foster's body was recovered. And we looked at the photographs. We excavated the, a 200, out to 200 yards, looking for the bullet that actually was fired from the gun and went through his skull. We examined all the other forensic evidence. We hired Dr. Henry Lee to assist in that investigation. We did a lot of experimentation to actually prove or disprove different theories, and we were able to prove what actually happened that day in Fort Marcy Park, as well as a psychological autopsy of Vince Foster. And what that means is we got into his psychology. We looked at and the fact of his depression. He actually was profoundly depressed at the time. He felt like his reputation had been harmed. And
I think there was a speech even that he gave.
Yes.
Yeah, talk about the speech, because I don't think most people know about this. I certainly didn't know.
He gave the commencement address at Arkansas School of Law that year. And 9 times during the course of that address, he mentions death and misery. It was supposed to be a very uplifting, happy speech, and he gets up there, the president of the school gets up there and just very effusively introduces him as the top lawyer in the world and all this great stuff. And Vince was very droll, he was very flat affect, and he said, they will come after you, there'll be hard times and there'll be stormy days, and when it happens to you in your career, do something for yourself, get away, take a walk alone in the woods. And that's literally the last thing he did in his life. But he called his sister up and asked her for names of a psychiatrist or psychiatrists who he could go to because he was depressed and he was anorexic and he wasn't sleeping. And because he didn't want to lose his security clearance, he wanted to get someone who had a security clearance so that he wouldn't lose his White House security clearance. He had called one of those doctors the night before, and he got his doctor to prescribe him antidepressants the night before as well. He took 1 pill, but it takes 2 weeks to get a therapeutic level in your system. There were a whole bunch of things that were coming together, but the week before, he and his wife went to play tennis with the Hubbles on the eastern shore of Maryland, and he kind of wandered off. He didn't want to play, and she found him sitting in a park on a bench crying. She said during the entire length of their marriage she had never seen him cry, including when his father had died just recently. And she said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I can't go back to Arkansas a failure." And so he was feeling like he was failing the Clintons. And some of that was due to the fact that Hillary was so demonstrative about chastising him in public about the job he was doing for the Clintons. She was saying he was not protecting the Clintons when his job was actually White House counsel, not Clinton counsel. But she made it all about him. Anytime there was a failed nomination, anytime anything went wrong, she sort of turned on him.
So give us a sense, I mean, Vince Foster is previously Hillary Clinton's boss. Talk about I mean, you're a behavioral profiler. Talk about Hillary Clinton's psychology, about her relationship with Vince Foster.
Well, once they got to the White House, things flipped. Hillary basically was Vince's boss, and she had an office. Even though she wasn't in the counsel's office, she had an office in the counsel's office. And so she was very present there where the White House counsel office staff was, and she basically was telling Vince in no uncertain terms that it was his job to protect the president from any scandal and from failed nominations and from, not letting anybody look down on the presidency. The fact is that one of the things that Vince wrote about was that, well, let me back up.
Sure.
Okay, and remind me if I get to that point.
Yeah, sure.
But when he was sitting on that bench and his wife found him crying, she asked him what was wrong, and he said he didn't want to go back to Little Rock a failure. She told him basically, "What are you talking about going back to Little Rock? I want to go to the White House Christmas ball. We're not going anywhere." So she was not really understanding the depth of his depression at the time.
Sort of like it seems more like a CEO suicide, somebody who can't deal with the mounting pressure.
It is, exactly. But in that case, she said, do what you always do. Whenever you have problems, write down a list. Write what's bothering you, and then we'll attack them one by one. And so, all right, that was the end of that conversation. Nobody ever saw that list until many weeks later, after the suicide, because the FBI was prevented from actually investigating his office, actually searching his office. And the lawyers for the White House actually did the search. This document was not found. But then weeks later, when they were turning over Vince's personal items to the family, one of the interns went in to his office, picked up his briefcase, turned it over to dump it out to make sure it was empty, and then was going to put things in, and a bunch of pieces of paper, I think 28 pieces of torn paper fell out. They put it together, and it was actually a list.
And what did the list say?
Well, it said a bunch of things, and I don't remember everything,
Sure.
but it did say that the travel office situation was basically setting Hillary up, and it was unfair to her. And one of the things that he said was, in Washington, ruining people is considered sport. Vince was not used to the fact that every single item that is done by the White House, anything, no matter how good or how bad, it's always politicized. If it's something, you know, for the good of the people that the Clintons' White House wanted to do, the other side of the house would always find something to complain about. And he wasn't used to having people criticize him. He was the #1 person in his law school, the #1 graduate in his school, the #1 lawyer in his law firm. He had the greatest reputation in Little Rock, and now everything that he did had detractors. And so he really was not ready for that. And so at some point, the Wall Street Journal, I think, it was either Wall Street Journal, I think, or the Washington Post, I can't remember.
It was Wall Street Journal, yeah.
Asked him for a picture of him so that they could do you know, an article, a column about him. And he said, no, I'm not the star here, I'm just a worker bee. You know, Bill is the star. And they took that as an affront, and they decided to go on attack about him. And one of the things that I found was that he had taken those columns where they basically criticized. They said, who is this guy? Some bumpkin lawyer from Little Rock. And they criticized him. He wrote in the column, he has very, very tiny, very distinct handwriting, and he wrote answers to the comments in the columns. And one of the other things that I found after years, we had to go to the Supreme Court to actually get access to the material that was in his office. It took us years to actually do that investigation that we should have been able to do immediately after he committed suicide. But we were prevented from doing it. But when I did actually get to go through those documents, one of the things that I found was a book that was on one of his shelves. It was a book of quotes. And I opened up the quote book. I flipped through it to see if there was anything about suicide in there. There wasn't. But then I turned to death. And in it, there was a quote, and it was circled. And it said something to the effect of, at the end of life, although the end of life is sad, from all that dies, new life springs. And it's circled. And he said, he wrote, isn't that a pretty thought?
Wow.
Next to it. And I copied that and I showed it to his wife, and she confirmed that it was his handwriting, and she cried. She cried so much, and she said, why didn't anybody show me this before? And I told her it was because we were prevented from doing this, but this is the kind of thing a trained investigator does. He looks in every nook and cranny. So she said, this is the first indication that I've gotten from him that he didn't do it to hurt me.
Oh, wow.
So all these years she had suffered in silence, thinking that Vince killed himself to hurt her, to get back at her, when it wasn't that at all. He had hoped that it would make things better, apparently, based on this quote.
Wow. Well, let's talk a bit, I mean, you're an expert in sex crimes and in kind of tawdry behavior. Let's talk a bit more about kind of maybe getting into the Clinton sex scandals, or into the you know, the Monica affair, or however you want to kind of attack it. I mean, kind of talk about moving from Vince Foster, re-examining that, and then kind of moving into more of the investigation?
Well, first of all, I think Bill was an insecure kid. I mean, he grew up, you know, he had an alcoholic parent, and he didn't have a lot of friends, and he developed, I think, at a very young age, the ability to make other people feel comfortable. He wanted to be friends. He wanted to have friends, so he learned at an early age how to make other people feel comfortable around him, and that's like the perfect personality for a politician, because he had a skill, and he was very effective at one-on-one interactions with people, and he would remember little details about people years later and bring them up when he met them again, and he used it very effectively. So I think his self-image was very poor as a child, and he built himself up. And I think there have been quotes, you know, he couldn't believe how women threw themselves at him when he became governor.
Sure.
I mean, he became very popular and so forth. I mean, there were sad stories, though, about when he lost the governorship after the first term, and he was at a grocery store shaking hands with people as they finished buying groceries, saying, "Hi, I'm Bill Clinton, I used to be governor," you know, trying to build that grassroots kind of thing, because that's what he was best at. And so, but you know, when they did this whole makeover at the time for Hillary, because she was very sort of anti-establishment at the time, and she was using her maiden name, and she wasn't sort of towing the Arkansas party line at the time. She did a makeover. He ran again. They won. They were in there for good, and then everybody knows the history of it. They became president and first lady. But the fact is that Bill had his personality was such that he was overwhelmed when somebody basically hit on him. He did not expect that to happen. He didn't, you know, he loved that whole allure of power that he now had with women, and I don't think he had a lot of impulse control. I think so. It was a combination of low self-esteem and poor impulse control that led him to sort of dally. And you know, that's not, you know, that's a moral issue, not a legal issue, unless
Sure.
he's forcing somebody, where there are, you know, there was at least one allegation that he tried to force himself on somebody, or unless he's sexually harassing someone. Now, the Monica Lewinsky scandal, the most important thing about that is I believe Bill is the one that signed in the sexual harassment law into law, and yet Monica Lewinsky lost her job because of the relationship she had with Bill, the sexual relationship she had with Bill.
Sure.
And I think that really was the basis of why it was being pushed to impeachment. That he lied to the public about whether the relationship happened. When it was proven, you know, she kept the blue dress, and it was proven that his DNA was on that dress. I think it all fell down. But I also think that politically, Congress decided that, you know, this wasn't the kind of thing that we want to destroy a presidency and really disrupt the governance of this country over. So
sort of not a high crimes and misdemeanors threshold.
Probably not.
Now, I mean, it would seem that there's no greater imbalance, you know, between a subordinate and a boss than between the President of the United States and a 24-year-old intern.
That's correct. I think it's a textbook case for sexual harassment. And I think it played out exactly why, the way it played out is exactly why the law was written, to prevent that from happening, and it did happen.
So, tell us about Monica Lewinsky and the Linda Tripp story.
So, Linda Tripp...
I don't think anyone knows this story, so
really?
We've got to...
Okay. Well, Linda Tripp was actually Vince Foster's assistant in the White House, and in fact, when the day that he committed suicide, he actually was in his office behind a closed door until just before lunch, and he handed Linda 3 envelopes and said, "Could you mail these?" And he said, "I left you some M&Ms on a tray on my desk." And then he left the office. And 2 of those letters have been identified. One was a letter to his mother about how to manage the oil leases that were actually her source of income. He was managing them. It was some oil leases that they had that he had been managing, and he gave her instructions on how to manage them from that day forward. He also sent in his final payment to his life insurance. And the 3rd letter, we have no idea who it went to. Nobody has admitted receiving it. theory is it probably went to one of the Clintons or both. But nobody knows where it went.
So these are sort of suicide notes,
yeah,
in a way.
Basically. So the next, so Linda Tripp was actually working in the White House counsel's office under Vince at that time. But when the controversies about Bill Clinton and sexual harassment were sort of roiling, Monica Lewinsky met with Linda Tripp and said that she wanted her to sign an affidavit in which Linda would have to swear that she was not aware of any sexual harassment by Bill Clinton. Linda, so what are you talking about? You told me about what happened with you guys. I mean, that's sexual harassment. And Monica then offered her the deed to her apartment, her parents' apartment in the Watergate Hotel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Now, did her parents know that this was going on?
I have no idea what was going on with her parents. I have no idea, but I don't think that Monica Lewinsky was in a position to just give away the deeds to apartment buildings. Apparently...
Certainly atypical for a 24-year-old.
Yes, it is, and apparently that was preceded by a meeting with Vernon Jordan and Monica Lewinsky. But I don't think that was ever... I was not part of that investigation. I don't know what the details were, but that was what the setup, the startup of that investigation, because Linda Tripp came to the independent counsel's office with those allegations. That was then written up and sent to the Attorney General, and Janet Reno sent it back to the independent counsel and said, no, you guys are going to do this investigation, and that's when the Monica Lewinsky investigation started. But at that time I got transferred to the major case squad in Washington field office, and then I was transferred to and promoted into the behavioral analysis unit after that. So I did not become part of those investigations.
Interesting. Now, I mean, you know, we're talking about the Clintons coming back. You know, there's obviously Hillary Clinton's going to run for office, and I know there'll be people out there who will see, you know, this interview and they'll wonder, you know, who is this, you know, Jim Clemente guy? Is he a right-wing nut? What is, you know, what situation? So yeah, I mean, if you feel comfortable, I mean, kind of make it clear to people, you know, that you're not.
Yeah.
You're an investigator. Right?
Yeah, I am an investigator, and I'm fairly apolitical. I mean, I don't subscribe to either of the two main parties. I basically pick and choose things on one side or the other. For example, I am very anti-death penalty. I do not think the death penalty should be something that a civilized society uses to punish people. I don't think it's a
you worked on the D.C. sniper case.
Of course I did, yeah. I worked on a number of cases where heinous crimes, I mean, heinous crimes were committed, but I still don't believe that the government should be coldly and calculatingly killing people because, one, you can make a mistake, and two, it's overwhelmingly used against minorities in greater numbers than it's used against people who look like me, and that's wrong. It shouldn't be that way. So I have some, you know, I believe in stronger gun control. I do not believe that everybody should be carrying guns. I don't think everybody is fit to carry a gun. I see examples of that day in and day out. Every single day in the United States of America, people are killed by other people with guns. And
if Vince Foster hadn't had a gun, being clinically depressed, he'd
and you know what?
Alive.
2 weeks before, well, at least 2 weeks before, his wife had started telling him, please get rid of those guns that you have in the apartment. These were guns that he had taken out of his father's house because his mother was afraid his father was going to use them to commit suicide. Vince Foster kept them, brought them to Washington, D.C., didn't realize that there was basically a handgun ban in Washington, D.C. Nobody, unless other than law enforcement, is allowed to actually own a gun in Washington, D.C. He thought, coming from Arkansas where everybody owns guns, he didn't think it was a problem. So he had the guns in the top shelf of his closet, and his wife was trying to get rid of them. I think that when you have guns available, people use them, and when people get all the time people get angry and have poor impulse control and go into fits of rage. If all they have is a feather duster, they're not going to be able to kill somebody with it. But if they have a gun, they can kill somebody.
So fair to say, I mean, you have heterodox views on a kind of make your decisions as you call it. Yeah, you call it like you see it, and you make your decisions case by case.
I'm extremely liberal in a lot of areas. I mean, I believe that everybody should have equal rights. I believe that everybody should have a right to marry. I believe that everybody should have a right to their beliefs, up until the point where it infringes on somebody else's life or liberty or their safety. And I think that those things, you know, I'm not a, you know, card-carrying liberal, and I'm not a card-carrying conservative, but those things that are important to me, I speak out about.
Sure.
But I am apolitical when I do an investigation. I knew nothing about the Clintons before I started that investigation. I was really excited, for example, when Bill Clinton came into the political scene. I mean, he kind of brought back sort of that panache that Kennedy had when I was a kid, when you looked up to the president and the presidency as iconic, and I thought he brought some of that back. He was young, he was dynamic,
sort of a new type of Democrat in some respects too.
And I voted for him. And you know, it's not that I hate Bill. I don't hate Bill, but I think that, you know, sometimes he did things that were not in the best interest of the country, and he demeaned the office. You know, and some of those things that he did when he was governor were probably illegal. So, you know, I don't like that, but I don't demonize him because of it.
Sure, sure. Well, I mean, give us a sense though, like, you know, there are all these people. You know, one of the arguments for the Clintons was that we were going to get two for the price of one, right? Mm-hmm. That we were going to have Hillary and Bill. I mean, sort of like Billary is kind of the joke on Twitter.
Well, I think, you know, when I think Hillary misspoke one time and said, "We are the president," I think, during an interview.
That's right, yeah.
And, you know, I think that basically is what we would call leakage. And in behavioral analysis, what that means is it's something that inadvertently actually leaks out information about what somebody is really thinking or doing in their minds. And so I think that Hillary was very smart, very strategic in her life and her career. I think she stuck with Bill, knowing that given the circumstances at the time, if Hillary had divorced Bill during all those scandals, that she would never be positioned to run for president at this point. Because of misogyny, I think, because of the fact that this is a very male-dominated thing. The President of the United States, it's still always been a man.
Sure.
She knew that she would have to actually gain sort of a national and international presence. I think she's been very strategic about being the Secretary of State, about being a senator, about being the First Lady. I think that was all part of a plan that she was able to work out. And it may work out for her, it may not. Because there's also things that have gone on that, you know, she's not the nicest person in the world. And behind the scenes, she's very mean to the Secret Service agents that
talk
protect
about that.
her life.
I mean, to give us a sense of like what it was like actually in the White House with Hillary, because I don't think people really know this.
She demanded that no employee of the White House speak to her directly, not to say good morning, not to hold the door for her, anything like that. She demanded that Secret Service agents not be seen in the halls of the White House, despite the fact that they were there to protect her life and the life of her husband. So she was very...
Did she give a sense as to why? I mean, what was the motivation?
She didn't like them. They were cops, you know, in her mind. She banned them from the residence of the White House, which was the first time any president or the First Lady had done so.
Talk about, you know, there's questions about odor issues with her. I mean, there's kind of like all sorts of...
Well, back when she was in the governor's mansion in Little Rock, the state police were the ones that did the personal security for the president, for the governor and his wife, and they didn't want to stand next to her because she didn't wear any deodorant. She was very much of a hippie at the time, and she just didn't want to follow suit. You know, she was, as I said earlier, using her maiden name, sort of. She was a rebel, and they did after he lost the governorship after the first term, which completely put a chink in their plan of trying to drive all the way to the White House. She did a makeover, you know, got her Hollywood friends to come out and give her a makeover, and she just totally sort of remade herself in the image of First Lady, and it was very effective. I think behind the scenes, she's a very different person, and everybody who has worked closely with her knows that, but her image, she's good at projecting an image that is inconsistent with what she's really like.
One of the things that I found kind of fascinating about kind of the post-Clinton presidency is how she seems to really like drinking. Like she seems to like going out and having a good time.
Well, I think she's a human being, and I don't fault her for that.
No,
fine, you know.
Yeah, sure.
It's not a problem. That's not a problem. What I care about is how does she treat human beings. I know that when the Bush Senior White House left, they were loved by the White House staff. They took a personal interest in the people who took care of them, who took care of the facility. Not the people that were important and in power, but the little guy. And that is really, that really shows what kind of people they were. Bill was very nice to the people who worked in the White House, the apolitical people. Hillary was not. She did not want to hear or see anything from them.
Now, do you think, I mean, you know, given how much you've observed the Clintons, do you think Hillary will be able to pull it off? I mean, do you think she'll be elected, or what's your sense? Will the inner Hillary come out?
You know, she has a good chance, I think, because she's a woman. I think the country is ready for a woman president. And I would actually love for there to be a woman president. I was extremely ecstatic that Obama was elected president. I thought, wow, finally, the United States of America has done something tremendous for race relations, and we've set the standard now for the rest of the world, not just, you know, our own country. So I was very happy that we had that, you know, sort of benchmark now. Great Britain has had a prime minister, has had female prime ministers, so why can't the United States have a female president? I really think it's about time that we have parity in terms of a woman should get exactly the same pay as a man. There should absolutely be no glass ceilings, and there should be no profession that a woman can't do if she's physically and mentally capable of doing that. So,
but Hillary shouldn't be the first woman president.
Well, I think it'd be a shame because I do believe that she is way too self-interested. I don't know her personally. I've met her one time because I testified right before her in the grand jury when she was brought in front of the grand jury by Ken Starr. Unfortunately, it's a secret proceeding. I can't tell you what I said in there, but she went in and you know, we met beforehand, and she was very cordial to me. Afterwards, she was not so cordial. And she was not very happy when she left that grand jury. And then she put on a, you know, pretty face and had her hair and makeup done and went outside and said she just had a nice chat in front of the cameras. She said she had a nice chat with Ken Starr and everything was wonderful, when that wasn't the attitude she had when she walked out of that room.
Now, I mean, kind of going back, the founders kind of wanted us to have a unitary executive for a purpose, right? You want to have one man, one woman, I guess, responsible for the job. But yeah, we've got sort of a dueling executive, and it seems sometimes like Bill is, you know, he puts off policy issues to say things like Hillary, the sort of pre-Hillary care kind of thing. And on other issues, she sort of seems to rely on him for a charm effect. What's your sense that, like, you know, you're a profiler. I mean, what's your sense of their marriage? Well, I mean, he's cheating on her. I mean, he has cheated on her. He's presumably still doing it, given what we know in the press. Yeah. I mean, is she just...
Well, I think it's a marriage of convenience. I think it may have been, you know, I mean, Bill probably, you know, romanced her, and I think she saw it as an opportunity to use his personality, as you said, his charisma, because she doesn't have it. She doesn't have that. She's learned. She's sort of copied from other people, I think, and probably from Bill. But I don't think that comes natural to her in any way, shape, or form. But I think it was, and still, and remains, a marriage of convenience. I mean, he's basically flaunting it, you know, at their house in New York. You know, there's been reports from the Secret Service about a woman who comes there.
The Energizer.
Yes,
that's her name.
Yeah. So it's literally for appearances and for access. I think Bill brings her a huge vote because he still remains popular with a number of people in this country. And I think those people will be loyal to him because she's loyal to him.
Sure. Now, in your sense, I mean, obviously you're not investigating the sex life of, you know, of Hillary Clinton, but there are all sorts of rumors and things from, you know, about her being gay, about Vince Foster, I mean, what was your sense, you know, as a professional?
I'll tell you this. Vince Foster wrote about her very respectfully in his journals. He was incredibly dedicated father and husband. There was absolutely no, although there was rumors, there was absolutely no proof or evidence that there was an affair between them. I think he was extremely respectful to her. He looked up to her, in a sense, because she was the First Lady of the United States, and she was Bill's wife, and he was the President of the United States. And I think that respect may have seemed like more, but again, when they were back in Arkansas, there was no proof or real indicators of any kind of affair. You know, I don't care what her sexuality is,
sure.
And it doesn't matter. And there are millions of people who feel they have to hide their sexuality in the world, and it's a shame, because people shouldn't be judged by their sexuality. And it's not just gay or straight. There's a lot of bisexual people as well. Sexuality is on a spectrum. I mean, heterosexuality and homosexuality, people who are 100% on either end of that spectrum, are the ends of the spectrum. There's a lot of gray area in between, and people can actually change over the course of their lives. You know, it's not a choice somebody makes, but people's actions, you know, they may feel that they can't act out, they can't be open about their sexuality, but sexuality should have nothing to do with politics.
Of course, right.
I mean, it's really not even a relevant discussion for this, so, you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wonder, though, because it must be difficult to have a husband that cheats on you, you know, and to not, you know, have a relationship with other people.
Well, it may or may not be for her, for that individual. Some people are asexual. Some people do not want to get involved in sexual relationships. Some people do, and they may have an arrangement. I mean, clearly she knows this. They must have had a number of talks over the course of decades that they've been together. I mean, this is not a secret between them, but it is their marriage, and they get to decide how to run them. I don't give a damn what they decide to do. It's their choice.
All right, so the Vince Foster investigation, there are a lot of rumors about material going missing. I mean, what do you say?
Well, the lawyers for the White House actually did the sort of search of the office, and so there was definitely classified information that he was working on in that office, and I'm sure that kind of stuff was removed because it's classified and it's not meant for public disclosure. So that could have been something that was taken out. But one of the other things that we did forensically was we found that not only did the wife identify the gun when I finally showed it to her years later, nobody had showed her the gun. She described it as silver, but when I showed it to her, and it was actually a very old, it was like from the early 1900s, but most of the bluing had worn off. So if you looked at it in the light, it had a silver-like reflection, and that's what she said. But she said it was a cowboy gun. Yeah, that's the gun. And so she identified it. Plus, there was an oven mitt in the glove compartment of his car at Fort Marcy Park. So what I believe happened was he put the gun in the oven mitt in his briefcase, so he couldn't bring the gun into the White House. So he took the oven mitt out and put it into the glove compartment while he went into the White House with his briefcase. Then when he went to Fort Marcy Park, he took the gun out of the oven mitt and put it into his right front pocket. What we found inside the oven mitt was pieces of chewed sunflower seeds or watermelon seeds, and we found particles of them inside the barrel of the gun. Oh, excuse me, inside the pocket, his right front pocket. We also found lead, antimony, and barium inside the oven mitt, which is gunshot residue, and we found that in the pocket. So we were able to trace how the gun got from his house into the oven mitt, into the car glove compartment, into his pocket, and then onto the side of the hill in his hand when he killed himself. The other thing was that when the first responders got there, one of them said they didn't see the gun in his hand. Well, the gun, he pulled the trigger this way, and his thumb actually got caught when the trigger recoiled. It was pinched in between the trigger guard and the trigger. And when his hand fell down, the gun was concealed partially by his hand and partially by his leg. For the guy who was up kneeling by his head looking, he didn't see the gun. The guy that was kneeling by his knees did see the gun. The guy who saw the gun described it as a pistol. He didn't know that a pistol is actually a semi-automatic weapon, and that a revolver is called a revolver. He didn't, when I asked him, he had made public statements that he saw a pistol in his hand, but he thought a pistol like a cowboy pistol, not a pistol like a semi-automatic weapon.
Right.
So
right.
I went through and painstakingly went through every single detail of every single witness to that case, and I was able to prove that actually, in fact, he committed suicide. There's no question. And I think since then, actually, since we published that report, that second Vince Foster report, there's really been there's never been any credible evidence or even a credible report that he didn't commit suicide.
I mean, we've talked about the Clintons, Hillary Clinton in kind of perhaps a negative light, or perhaps just, in your professional capacity, but were there traits that you admired about her? I mean,
I think Hillary Clinton has a number of traits that are admirable for a politician. I think she's tenacious. I think she is not going to be afraid of anybody. And it's not, it's not that I think she's evil. It's that I think she sort of treats people badly, and it's unfortunate. I wish she had better balance in her life. I wish she could sort of treat people with respect no matter who they were, whether they were law enforcement or military. I think she treats law enforcement officers and military officers very poorly. I do not think she respects them.
And how do you make that determination?
Based on her pronunciations. She's told people, and she's made those people who basically are sacrificing their lives for her to get out of her way, or they would be transferred somewhere else and punished. And it's not the way it should be done. And she should have a full and abiding respect for law enforcement. And just because she feels like there's some sort of right-wing conspiracy against her doesn't mean she should treat every law enforcement officer or every military officer badly. I mean, certainly not every law enforcement officer or military officer is a right-wing person to begin with.
Sure.
Many of us do not identify with the right, and some of us don't identify with either side, but will, accept people on either side depending on what the circumstances are and the kind of person they are.
So this is sort of the last question, but you're an investigator. I mean, were there maybe kind of talk to the media right now, because I think there may be some manufactured Clinton scandals, maybe some things that are kind of taken out of context. Well, where would you look? I mean, if you were giving advice to a younger self and FBI, now on the FBI side, or what advice would you give to kind of maybe Benghazi investigators or to the press generally about the Clintons?
First of all, let's talk about Benghazi, and then
Sure.
we'll talk about sort of these ridiculous allegations against the Clinton. You have to understand that not everything that happens in the State Department is public information.
Sure.
There is incredibly important classified operations that go on around this world every single day. And because of politics, sometimes people in power have to make up a story to cover things because other things are going on. Right. And so if anybody thinks that Benghazi was simply about, somebody dropping a ball or somebody, wanting to cover up and make something sound better than it was, just for pure,
or a video
political,
or whatever, yeah.
Purposes, they're wrong. I mean, the government and this government is incredibly complex, and there's a lot of things that the general public just simply does not have a right to know. Otherwise, we can't honestly protect the country. So Benghazi is a totally different animal than how it's mainly portrayed in the press. And I think my brother talked a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah. I've interviewed him on that too.
Yeah. So, we'll leave it at that. But there have been, and this goes all the way back to the Whitewater days, there have been these conspiracies that have swirled around about people that have died mysteriously around the Clintons. Well, they have hundreds, if not thousands, of people that are associated with them. And people
Sure.
they know and they're friends with, and distant relatives and friends of friends of friends and so forth, and people who worked for them in different capacities or interacted with them in certain ways. And it seems anytime one of those persons has, a car accident and dies or commits suicide or whatever, they automatically assume that the Clintons were behind this massive conspiracy to kill these people.
Right,
Well, that's 100% ridiculous. There's absolutely, I mean, I was in Little Rock, we were doing investigations, we interviewed thousands of people. There was not one single shred of evidence to back up any of those allegations. It's complete garbage.
Right, I remember reading at one point that the average congressman meets something like 50,000 people a year, and the average person meets between 2,000 and 4,000.
Right.
So you got to imagine somebody who's politically as skilled as
Bill and Hillary.
Bill and Hillary. That
they're meeting more than 50,000 people a year in the
right.
capacities that they have, and it's just ridiculous to sort of weave these tangled webs of conspiracy. The fact is that they are politicians, and politicians in general do a lot of things that are not necessarily above board.
What I've appreciated with your work is that you really kind of get into the mind of the person, the who, right? You really focus, you really drill down. Now, are there any kind of insights that you want to, kind of impart to maybe not people who are investigators, right? Anything that you kind of observed about the Clintons that you think are kind of interesting traits that might be, more fascinating as time goes on, or might give a clue as to who they really are?
Well, here in behavioral analysis, in criminal behavioral analysis, what we do is indirect personality assessments. Psychologists and psychiatrists actually do clinical evaluations. They talk to the persons. And a lot is based on self-reporting. One of the reasons why we rely so heavily on behavioral analysis and why it's effective is because we don't rely on self-reporting. We look at somebody's behavior and we look at how that tells you what they're really thinking and what's really important to them. For example, if you go to a crime scene and you see behavior exhibited at a crime scene, we reverse engineer that behavior to the type of person who committed that crime. A person commits a crime, they pick a particular victim at a particular time, in a particular place, in a particular manner, for a particular purpose. All those choices tell you something about that offender. Why he's doing what he's doing,
sure.
What level of sophistication he has, how he can pull off that crime, what's his method of ingress and egress, what is his level of planning, how much did he think about it beforehand, or was this an impulsive act that happened that is going to jam him up later? And I think you'll see, although Bill Clinton is a very bright guy, and he was able to, he'd read briefing papers and look at a list of talking points and be able to talk about it for 2 hours as if he had read, or if he had written that 100-page white paper that a bunch of experts had put together in the weeks before. He was very, very good, very, very sharp, extremely good in the room. Hillary, I think, has become better and better at that, but I don't think she has quite the level of expertise that Bill has in the area of interpersonal relations. And I think if you look at her personality, you're going to see somebody who wants it done the way she wants it done. The unfortunate part of that is she going to surround herself with people who are afraid of her, or is she going to surround herself with other smart people who can give her additional perspectives and actually learn from them, actually take a different, contrary view and not be afraid that she's going to fire them or, jump down their throat in some way?
Well, with that, thank you for having us. If there are kind of any other questions, but I think thank you for the time. I really appreciate it.
No problem.